How's it going, everyone? I am Alex from Level Up Plus VFX, and welcome to the first episode of our Silo-inspired environment series. This video is all about layout, where we'll be actually building out the environment and getting it ready for the texturing stage. We'll start by importing our base asset for this scene, which in this case is a single floor of the silo, and then we'll clean it up a bit and add some extra details to really push it to the next level. After that, we'll lightly touch on some geonode methods to procedurally add more levels to it and make any further edits we need just a little bit easier. Once that's done, we will import and modify some building props over from Kitbash 3D to fill out the residential areas of the silo, and finally we'll set up some basic lighting for our scene so we can see what we're doing when we move on to the next video, which will be all about creating our materials. So with that out of the way, make sure to subscribe and let's get started. The very first thing you're going to need to do is download this silo model that I have here on GrabCAD. This doesn't use a normal Blender acceptable file format. It is more of a CAD format. So you're also going to want to pick up this plugin, which will allow you to import this model into our scene. And once the plugin is installed, when you go over to File, Import, you will now see the 3D manufacturing format available for you as an import option. Once we click that, we can go over to our silo folder and choose our silo model. With the silo imported, we can finally take a look at our base model here. Now, this is dimensionally accurate according to the creator to the actual show's set. And that is awesome because we have all these tiny little details and we can know that everything here will actually work up to scale. However, speaking of scale, we'll notice that this is actually much smaller than it should be. I have the Rigify add-on turned on, so if I add in a human base model here, we can see that a human should be roughly this size. And so clearly our silo is a little small.
What is this?
A silo.
For ants! What?
So let's scale this up. I've selected everything and then I'm going to control click on my mannequin here so I can scale everything but the mannequin. And here the magic number is going to be 150. So I'm going to hit S on my keyboard and then type in 150 and we will have it at the correct size. Now I know this is the correct size not only because my human now fits much more realistically into the scene, but the average stair step is roughly 16 to 17 centimeters. And if we add in a mesh cube here, move it over, hit N on our keyboard to look at the item properties and scale it down to be roughly 17 centimeters here. And if we line this up with a stair step, we can see that that is falling in just right. Now that our silo is the correct scale, I'm going to do Control A and apply the scale so everything is reset back to 1, just so we don't have any issues when we do our texture projections. The next thing we're going to want to do is optimize some of the meshes here because we can see they're just a bit messy. If we look at them here, if we look at this one especially, it's because it was made in a CAD program and is being brought into Blender. Now, there is only so much you can do before you fully remesh it. However, one of my favorite things to do is with everything selected, you can do Alt-J, and this will turn triangles into quads, which just cleans up some of the mesh here, at least a little bit. So if I actually select everything and go into edit mode, which will take a minute, now that everything is here, I can hit A on my keyboard to select everything, and then again do Alt-J, and it will take a minute, but it should convert every mesh in my scene into quads. Now that doesn't fix every issue here, like this has just so many faces, it's so unnecessary, but it does at least get us part of the way there. Since we're going to be instancing this whole thing around making, our multiple levels, it's not the end of the world if this is quite high poly, but it is nice to fix some things that will cause us headaches later. Like how these lights here are all one object, even though they have like the ring around them here and then the actual glass. And then of course we're going to want to extend our floor outward a bit so we have a place to actually put our buildings and our houses and stuff like that. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to add in a cylinder here with, I'd say, 64 vertices, and then I'm going to scale this up to the size of our edge, and I'm going to scale it down on the z-axis like so, something like just like that, just so it's a little bit smaller than our base mesh. We could even just drop it down, but I don't want to delete any of the lights that are below it, so perhaps something just like this would be good. Now with this selected, I'm going to go into ghost mode so I can see it a little bit easier, and I'm going to select the rings all around the edge. So if I go over to an edge here of a face and do Alt and click, it'll select the whole edge of the scene. Then if I do Alt E, I can extrude faces along normals, and this will allow me to extend essentially the ground of our silo. The reason, again, we're not doing this on the base mesh is because the faces are just a little bit wonky, especially near the exit from the stairway. So just doing a separate model here works better. Now I'm going to just move this up a little bit, and I think it's no problem to have a little lip here. It's almost like you're stepping down into the common area from the main road or the main walkway. So I think that's entirely fine. We just need to delete this interior circle here by selecting both and deleting faces, and we should be good to go. Now that we're getting a little bit more into cleaning up our model, I'm also going to organize all my objects. So for now, I'll select everything and then deselect my mannequin here. I'm going to hit M on my keyboard and move it to a new collection, and I'm going to call this silo_base. And with that done, we can scroll up to the top and just hide that collection like so. Now looking at some reference, we can see that something that stands out to me when I look at this is these little slates or slips between each piece of concrete. This really shows that the silo was made of a bunch of different sections of concrete that were molded and then put together, rather it all being one giant mold. And that makes sense. These are, 1,000-pound pieces of concrete. There's no way that you would build this thing all as one piece. Just like how you put together a Lego set in engineering, you build out little pieces and you slot them all together, just like how we're making our model. So in order to replicate that a bit, we want to cut into the sides of our stairwell and our walls here in order to give it that handmade look. It's not perfect, it's not pristine. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to drop in a cylinder, and I'm going to use 30 vertices on this guy here. And we're going to scale it down a lot. We're going to make it really small because these are not going to be big cuts. They're going to be very small and hardly visible. Once you've shrunk it down, you'll hit tab and jump into edit mode. And again, select all of the side edge loops, hit Alt E on your keyboard and extrude individual faces in order to stretch these out all the way till they cover just about everything. Tabbing out of edit mode, we can hit S on our keyboard and Z to scale it up on the Z axis. And I'm just to scale it up a bit here. And then here we'll do like 50. And then we'll bring it down so it's cutting into everything. And we might want to bring this up at least a little bit more, so something like this. So we're cutting into the stairwell completely as well. Now with our base layer for the floor selected, I will go over to the modifiers tab and add in a Boolean. We'll set this to fast, and then we'll select our cylinder object. And it might take a little bit of time for it to calculate, but once it does, we should have these nice cuts now going through our silo base mesh, and we can see that those look perfect. Now what we're going to do is the exact same thing for the stairs here. So I'll select the stairs, I'll add in a Boolean, set it to fast, and then I'll click on my cylinder object here. And for now, I'm not going to delete this. I'm going to leave it just as it is, and those look perfect. I think those are probably pretty evenly spaced. We might have wanted to drop down to 28 slices rather than 30, but I think this is just fine. So with that done, we'll want to do the exact same thing to the stair walkway here. We're going to want to do some slits going through it. So we'll add in a cube. We'll bring it over here. We'll scale it down on the y-axis this time. And again, we want to scale it down a lot. So maybe like 0.05, 0.01. And that is probably good. Maybe even smaller, 0.005. Just a tiny little slate that we'll go through, and we'll scale that up in every direction and then bring it down to cut in. Looking at it here, I can see I feel like it could go even smaller, so scale it down just on the Y, 0.5, so make it half of whatever thickness we made it there, and we should be good. And that reminds me that the ground isn't actually being cut into in this shot. What is happening is the sides are being cut, but the top layer where people are walking is still flat. So when we actually cut this, what we're going to want to do is exclude the top floor layer here and only cut in the sides. So I'm going over into Blender, I'm going to tab into edit mode, I'm going to select the face that is just the ground here, and I'm going to hit P on my keyboard and separate by selection. That way we have a separate object for this. And then with the stairwell, or whatever you would call this, the walkway selected, Boolean, fast, and then we'll select our plane. Now if we hide our plane object, we can see that we're cutting into it just like we were cutting into before. And I actually think I made it a little too thin. It looks thinner than the other slices a little bit. But honestly, I don't think that's that big of a deal. We'll just pump this out just a little bit more. So maybe something like that. I think that is just perfect. We could add an array to array it through. So I think let's do that. Selecting the cube, I'll add in an array modifier. So instead of going on the X direction, we'll want it to go on the negative Y direction. So we'll move it, I don't know, something like here. And then we'll array this down the line. We want to make sure that these are all like even looking portions. Right now it looks like the middle's a little bit fatter. So maybe something like that would be good. Let's hide our cube and see. It looks like the edge over here is smaller than the others. Let's try and make this a little bit more even. Maybe something like that. And I think that is probably just perfect. So with all those cuts out of the way, what we're going to do is we're going to rename this collection to bool. And then I'll just go ahead and disable the Boolean collection for now, just so it's out of sight, out of mind, and I don't accidentally add new objects to it. Now that that's done, let's move on to some optimizations we can do for the scene. The big one is by instancing some things that could easily be instanced. For example, right now, every one of these pillars, they're all identical. However, they're all their own individual object. If we instance these, it'll be so much easier on our system compared to if we were to copy and paste them all around. Yeah, they're all 35,000. So when there's, 14 of these scattered around this circle here, that's a free 500,000 triangles that could be instanced instead. So that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to essentially duplicate we're going to join these two pillars together, and then we're just going to instance them around in a circle. And honestly, even easier than that is I can take this one pillar, instance it here, and then take that group and instance them around. So I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by taking everything that's just here in this pillar area and not selecting the round, and we'll make sure that we have everything selected. We do. And I'm going to move this into a new collection, and I'm going to call this pillar. And with those selected, what we can do is we can select these, and I have a modifier on this one that we'll just delete for now. So it's just a decimate. And with these all selected now, we will Alt-D to duplicate it. We'll move this into another collection. We'll call this pillar duplicate. We'll just call it pillar dupe. And with pillar dupe selected, because our origin point for all these objects is actually in the center of the scene, if we select these, it's all in the middle. If we do individual origin, we'll see it's still all just there. So we can just select all of pillar dupe, R, and then we'll hit Z to rotate on the Z axis, and we'll just line this up somewhat there. Looks like 22.9 is pretty dang close. 0.96 is exactly what we wanted. So now that that's there, I'm going to deselect pillar dupe, and I'm going to delete this original pillar here. So that's gone. We can turn pillar dupe on again. And we can see that these two, this is now a duplicate of this pillar. And so what we want to do next is we want to take both of these and we're going to instance them in increments around the silo. All right, now that we have our pillar and our instanced pillar collection, let's go ahead and create one more, and we'll call this geonode underscore pillar. And we'll add in a plane or a cube or really any object to our scene. We just need to make sure that it's at the center. In order to do this, these geonodes are very simple. We'll create a new collection, and we can honestly delete the geonodes input. All we need to do is take our pillar collection, we'll drag it in, we'll take our pillar dupe collection, drag it in, and then we'll join geometry. So I'll add in a join geometry node. And then all we need to do in order to get these to repeat around the scene is add in a repeat zone. Hey there guys, Alex from the future here. So I wanted to revisit these pillars real quick, how we're instancing them around in a circle. Well, I do love this repeat zone method. What it is actually doing is it is taking our original object, it's creating this offset here, and then in the next repeat, what it's doing is it's taking these two objects and repeating them, which leads to a bunch of overlap. So I'm going to quickly show you how to fix that. So I'm going to delete my repeat zone, and actually I will delete all of my changes as well, but we'll keep the collection here. So I'll delete all this, and what we'll do is we'll add in a mesh line here, and it will have no offset, and we just want 6 instances. So we'll set this to 6, and then we'll do instance on points, just like we did earlier. So this will be our point setup, and this will be our instances. And in order to set the rotation, what we'll do is we'll add in a index node, which will control index, and we're going to want to do a multiply. We'll do a multiply, and we want to multiply this by a value of 60 and convert this to radians. So we'll set this to a math2 radians node into a combine XYZ, and then we'll do a Euler to rotation notion, and then we'll plug this in, and we should be set with this, and now we have no overlap. So again, that's index multiplied by 60 to radians into the Z socket and Euler to rotation. And when we instance that all on points, we are all set up once again. So now that we have our geonode set up, actually spawning these around everything, we need to delete the originals. So I'm going to hide the geonode pillar set up here and just go through. We'll just delete all these pillars like this. There's probably a faster way to delete them all, like selecting similar, but this works just as well. So if we turn on the geonodes pillar, we're at 3.2. So we saved about 300,000 points. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, but I'm definitely happy with that either way. It will just help us a little bit in the long run. Now, there's one last thing I want to do before we start stacking this all up and actually turning it into our silo, and that's add some buildings to the perimeter. I won't lie, in my original render, when I made this the first time, I hand-placed a bunch of building assets. However, this time around, I want to do something a little different and use geonodes some more. So we're going to essentially create a circle around our perimeter where we will instance random buildings at the right scale to give this some variation. That will also give us the benefit of when we scale this up and have a bunch of different layers, we'll have tons of buildings throughout our entire silo. And we'll start by creating a mesh circle and scale it up so it follows our perimeter. I just did 2, 2 there, and that seemed just about right. Looking at it from the top, we can see, yeah, it lines up with our circle just right, and we'll bring it down a little bit like that. And we'll name this, of course, geonode build, BLD for short, and we'll create a new geonodes graph. Now in the geonodes panel, we're going to want to use a mesh to curve to turn this into an actual curve object, because right now this is actually a mesh, and then a curve to points. And this will allow us to dynamically change the amount of buildings that spawn when we use instance on points, which we're going to add next. So instance on points, and now we need to choose our instances. I have a subscription to Kitbash 3D's Cargo, which allows me to buy or download up to 10 assets a month. For this project in particular, I really like their Future Slums 2 pack, and for now I've just downloaded a single asset and opened it up in a new Blender file so we can set it up, prep it, and when we're ready, move it over to our main script. So in order to get this into our main scene and be ready, what I'm going to do is take the main object of this building, do Control D, and move it over a bit. Looking at it, everything seems right, but this is currently parented to the main object, which we can see from that little parent line there. So we'll do Alt P and choose Clear Parent and keep Transform. With this separate building now, we can actually break it up into a couple different chunks, because if you just take a look at it here, you can see that it's actually rather large. It's about, 10 stories tall, and clearly that's much taller than one floor in the silo. One floor of the silo will realistically be about this tall. So let's break it up into a couple different chunks that we can copy over. So to do that, I'm going to do Shift D, and I'm going to have 3 different variations that I'll use on the silo. With the center building selected, I'll do Shift S, and then I'll do Cursor to Selected to place my cursor on it, and I'll add in a cube, scaling this up until it envelops our building, and just get those bottom 2 floors covered. We're going to Boolean the top ones out. So with that building selected, I will add in a Boolean, set it to fast, and choose the cube. Once that's done, I can just apply the Boolean and delete the cube. And we now have our bottom floor, and it has some weird geometry kind of flying out of it. So what I'll do is I'll go into edit mode, and then I'll delete the edges that are floating out in space just because we don't need them. Are there any more? There's like a cable here that we might be able to delete, but I think we'll leave that for now. And what I want to do is I want to sort of do this the same way on some of these other layers. So let's take this other building here. The first thing I know is that we don't need that top portion of it. So in edit mode and ghost mode, I'll select all faces and I'll go all the way to the top like this. With them selected, I can just delete faces. And I'm hitting X on my keyboard to choose the delete faces option, by the way. And we'll do the same Boolean thing with the bottom of this building now, so we kind of only have this center block. So I'll do Shift S, cursor to selected, add in a cube, scale it up, bring it down, and we'll bring it all the way until we've sort of matched this bottom layer here. So maybe something like this. And we can add a Boolean, fast, choose the cube, and apply it. And just like last time, there are going to be some floating edges, so we'll just select these in edge mode, and we'll delete the edge. And that is pretty clean. So now we have 3 kind of levels for the building, and something to help us out as well is I'm going to select the whole thing, and I'm going to do GZ, and I'm going to bring it up until its bottom has that origin point on it, something like that. And I'll do the same thing for this other one. I'll select it, go into edit mode, GZ until the bottom is on the origin point, like that. There we go. And then for this last building, which we're not going to touch, so we don't need to bother with it. So I'll copy these 2 here, do Control-C, copy objects. If you don't get a copy objects option, that's because I have the copy attributes menu enabled. So if you have the copy attributes enabled, you can do copy objects like this. We'll go over to our main script and we'll just paste these buildings into here like this. And we can actually take these and just move them a little farther away, and we'll be good to go. Now that we have the 2 parts of our buildings actually in our scene, we can take them into the geonode setup and scatter them around the silo. With them selected, I'm just going to drag them into my geonode script, and we'll take one and plug it in to the instances option of the geonodes. And we'll see that we're getting an error, so we'll check as instance, and everything should work just fine. If your buildings are super huge, something I forgot to record, but I did off camera, was I applied the scale of the geonodes object. That's our little circle here. So applying the scale makes them much more reasonably sized. So make sure your scale is 1 for this object. However, they are still a little too big, and they're all facing the same direction. We want them kind of facing towards the center of the silo. So let's start by modifying their rotation. Add in a position node and separate XYZ. We're then going to do just a little bit of math. Add in a math node and set it to the arctan2 option. Plug X into the second input and Y into the first, and then all we need to do is add in pi. So taking our value here, we'll plug it into the top, switch this to an add function, and do 3.14. Now, if you want to know exactly what these operations do, I recommend going to college for 20 years, and then maybe you'll understand it. For me, I just Googled this on ChatGPT, and it gave me this, and it worked great. So thank you, ChatGPT. Very cool. All we need to do is take this and then recombine it into XYZ. So I'll drop down a combine XYZ node. Then we need to take this vector information and turn it into rotational information, which we can do with a Euler to rotation node. So we'll just drop that in. And once we plug that in, everything is facing towards the center. And we can see that these buildings are scaled up a little too big still though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take in a transform geometry node and plug that into our object. We'll set the scale to something like 0.5. And 0.5 seems still just slightly too big. So let's drop it down to maybe 0.4. And that seems to line up just right. Now, to get some more random variation, we could randomly associate each object with a random rotation on increments of 90, but for now we're just going to start by adding more objects and setting this up a little bit right. But let's translate it down just a little bit. So I'm going to bring the translation down something like that, and we will rotate this with another transform to something like, nope, that's fine. Now from here, I'm just going to stretch this out so they're a little bit wider. I don't know, I just liked the wider look of these when I built my silo the first time. And then finally, what we need to do is bring in our other piece of geometry. So I'm going to copy this transform, which was scaling everything down, and then I'm going to join geometry with our previous one. And if we choose pick instance and make sure that this is set to as instance, we can see that now every other object is our other building asset. And we need to mess with the scale of this just a little bit as well. as well as flip it around because the door is on the wrong side. We want the doors facing outwards. So starting with the door problem, we can rotate this by 180 degrees. And then we're also going to take this, we'll set this back to 0 and 1, and we'll just move this on the x-axis so it's right in place again. Now we need to mess with the scale, so let's set this to something like 0.6 maybe. Let's try 0.7, and I think that's feeling pretty correct. Let's find our little mannequin guy here, focus on him, and drag him in front of one of these doors to see if he would fit if he tried to walk through it. I think it's a little too small for his head right now. I don't think he's that large of a guy, so let's make these just a little bit smaller, larger. So let's do 0.75 perhaps, and we'll also need to bring this to the ground because it's floating right now. So we'll do 0.8, and then we're also going to bring this down just a bit on the z-axis. And I think that's probably right for our current circumstances. Now that we have these buildings, I'm sure we're going to add more in the future, but let's actually array this silo up so it's moving upwards into space. We can see what our final environment looks like. And this is going to be the last bit of geonodes that we have to do for this whole setup. We'll, of course, dive into it more when we add more buildings. Maybe we'll try some geonode prop setups in the next lesson, but for now, we're just going to scale this up and get a render going, see how everything's looking. So let's do that. We'll add a new collection. We'll call this geonodes silo. Center point is in the center of our scene, so we'll do Shift S, cursor to world origin, and then we'll add in a plane. It could be a point, it could be whatever. We'll add a new geonodes setup, and we'll even call this one silo array so we don't lose it. Now, lucky for us, the geonodes for this one is also fairly straightforward. We'll delete the group input and we'll add in a mesh line. And with this will control how tall everything is. Right now, we're going to just set this to a count of, I think, 5 to start with. And we know that we want this to be going up every 10 meters. We then want to convert this to a mesh to points. So we'll bring here mesh to points, and then we don't really care about the radius at the moment, but we need to bring in an instance on points node. We'll select this as our points. Let's start by just bringing in our collection of our main silo base. So we'll do this by bringing in the silo base collection, and we will instance this on points to see how everything looks. So let's go ahead and throw this into our instances slot. We can see that it is sort of working, though it's a little taller than it needs to be. The silo is built in a way where it's broken up into thirds. So there's one staircase going this way, one staircase going this way, and one staircase going this way. And that increments as it goes up. So what we want to do is essentially tell the silo, hey, on this level, be at 1 degree, at this level, be at the other degree, at this level, be at the last degree, and then reset here. And we can do that by doing a little bit of radians math. With this selected, we're going to take the index, which essentially is each point on our that we're instancing things on. And then what we want to do is multiply this by 120 degrees. So I'm going to add in a multiply node, set this to 120 degrees. And of course, we only want it rotating on the z-axis, just like last time. So we'll set this to combine x, y, z. We'll plug this into the rotation, and we'll see that it didn't exactly work. And that's because, by default, Blender uses radians for rotation. It doesn't use degrees. So we need to find an easy way to convert this 120 degrees into radians before we multiply it by the index. Hey there everyone, Alex from the future here. So in the video, I actually show you the math on how to convert something to radians, but I realized that there was a node that just lets you do it. So if you add a math node and you take it from your 120 value here, and then you simply do 2 radians, which is over here, you're all set. So just use that instead of what I did over here. You take degrees and you multiply it by pi divided by 180, and you get that value in radians. So if we plug this in now instead, we'll see that we got the proper value. I think that these are rotating in the negative direction. So all I'm going to do is take this multiply, and I'll do multiply by -1. And now now the floors are lining up. They're just not vertically lining up just yet. So we need to drop our offset down until they line up. So something, I think, just like that should be perfect. And now they're lining up. So 7.5 ended up being the perfect value. And now all we can do is we can increase our count as much as we want. And we have a silo that endlessly goes up forever. But of course, we don't want to just instance the base silo. We also want to instance these buildings and, of course, our big old pillars as well. So how do we do that? Well, it's actually pretty simple. We'll just go into the instances collection, We'll grab geonode pillars. We'll drop it in. We'll do it at join geo. Join geo. We'll drop in our pillars here. And now our pillars are instancing up as well. We'll do the same thing for our geonodes building. So we'll grab, again, the silo. We'll take geonodes building. We'll plug it in here. Or actually, you know what? We can just take these and move this into a new collection. So I'm going to take these two. I'll move them into a new collection, and I'll call this building assets. And if we do that, we should be set. So now I can hide this. And we now have our silo, which is scaling everything up, rotating it, and creating something pretty nutty now that you look down and actually see it. So let's make this really tall. Let's give this, like, I don't know, 20 floors. You know what? Let's actually take this moment and throw in a camera. So I'll add in a new collection. I'll call this cam, and I'll add in a camera to this collection. We'll focus on it. We'll try and get a good view from like a ledge of the silo here. So now if we want to actually see this in rendered mode and just see kind of how it looks, what we can do is add in a light. So let's go into the camera collection, I guess, for now. We'll add in a light. I'll say a area light for now. We'll bring this all the way up to the top. I scale this up so it's nice and big, something like that. I did 5 and 5 on my keyboard a couple times. This will need to be very bright, so maybe 500,000. When we look through our rendered view, we could probably drop this down, I guess. Maybe something like 20,000. There we go. That is our silo just about ready to move on to the texture step. Now this lighting would be fine if we just wanted to be able to see what we're doing, but we could actually take it one step further and actually get some basic lighting set up for our scene. So let's start by going to our very bottom base layer. We can do this by, again, disabling the geonode silo. And what I'll do is I'll select our pillars here, and we're going to find the original pillar collection. So I'm going to grab the pillar dupe, and I'm going to enable it, and I'm going to disable the pillars selection, and we'll leave pillar dupe off. We'll just grab the light object, and we'll add in a new material, and we'll call this light_emission. And we'll set this emission to a value of something like 10. And I actually have a clay material override, so I'm going to disable that. And with that light of 10, I think that is perfect. So if I turn this geonode pillar back on now and I hide my pillars collection, we can see that we actually have our lights lighting up the scene. Let's disable the area light for now. That lighting is so much better. We can take this one step further by having the interior lights turn on. So let's hide the geonodes again real quick. And we know that the pillars over here have some lights on them as well. Let's make sure to select all of these. I think there's one more on the other side. There we go. I'm just going to assign this the emission material like that. And I think the last thing we have is there's some lights on the back here as well. So again, I'll turn off this, turn on the pillar collection. And this one's a little tricky because this is actually all one object, even though it should have the holder material. In the next video, when we do texturing, we'll probably separate these out. But for now, let's just add the emission material to that as well. So disabling the pillar dupe collection, we'll turn on our silo once again. We should probably call this silo object. And if we look through our rendered node, we will see everything should be nice and lit up. It definitely is. Of course, these kit bash elements came in with some textures already applied to them. But yeah, that is some basic lighting. At the very least, it'll help us when we start texturing, and I'm excited to jump into that. So in the next video, we're going to dive deep into texturing, from procedural triplanar setups for some concrete materials to creating decals that we can spread across our rings of our staircase here and on the edges where you would normally see water leaks and stuff like that, to some more realistic emission shaders for our lamps and lights here. So hopefully that all sounds exciting to you. If it does, make sure to get subscribed, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.